Okay. Hi everyone, my name is Liz, I read, and welcome to another video. In this video, I'm going to be sharing my review and thoughts on the Grisha Trilogy. So this video is going to be full of spoilers. I'm just going to lay that out right away. This video is mostly for me to help me get my feelings out with this trilogy. This trilogy was not what I was expecting, but at the same time, not surprised it went the direction it went. But I just want to make this video because I have some thoughts and they're quite a bit. I wrote a lot of things down, so let's just get into this video. So I'm sure you've read the series if you're watching me, but the Grisha Trilogy contains Shadow and Bone, Siege and Storm, Rune and Rising, all by Leigh Bardugo. I also read The Tailor, which I loved, and I think the best way to do this chat is to go book by book. So I'm not going to give a synopsis. If you're watching this video, you probably already know what the synopsis is, and you probably read the series already. So if you haven't read it, go look it up and then come back to this video if you want to be spoiled. But spoilers, spoilers, spoilers. So the first book I read obviously was Shadow and Bone, and this I gave a 5-star rating. This was my favorite book out of the trilogy, and I pretty much loved everything about this book. There was hardly anything I disliked. I liked everything. I liked how Alina discovered her power. I liked her first interactions with the Darkling. For me though, it was definitely a slow start, and not in a bad way. I felt like I was completely thrown in to this brand new world with hardly any information, and I felt the information was just kind of thrown at you, especially when it comes to the Grisha powers. It was just a lot to take in all at once. To this day, I still don't know what all the Grisha powers are or understand them, specifically with the matrix. Look at it. Specifically the material key powers. Specifically the fabricators. There's 2 classes in there and I still don't even know what they are. It's something I need to look up, but I just felt like you understood the other powers more because you interacted with them more often, because people with Inferno or the Tide powers or whatever it's called, the Squallers and Tide Makers, and then the Heart Renders and the Healers, they were the ones in battles, and so you got to see them in action more, and so you were more familiar with those powers, where the other powers was kind of on the sidelines, and I couldn't, anyways, it doesn't matter. I still to this day couldn't understand those different classes within that one category. Anyways, you were kind of thrown into it. Eventually, I obviously picked it up and got the information that I needed in order to read the story. And so once I finally got familiar with all the Grisha powers, for the most part, it was easier. I was glued to the maps all the time. I was very thankful that they were there, and I always enjoyed looking at them, constantly flipping back and forth. It's definitely an interesting world, and I do love the world. That's one of my favorite characters, if you want to call it that. I loved the fear that you felt with Alina and Mal when they first entered the fold. You definitely felt the danger there, and I liked how Leigh Bardugo used that one character who was close to Lena, one of her co-workers, I guess. Not co-workers, one of the people she works with in the regiment, was killed off right away, so you felt the danger there. You realized that this was a scary place and that you shouldn't take the fold lightly. It's dangerous. I loved reading everything from Alina discovering the powers all the way to when she first goes to the little palace. I loved all the events that folded up there. I love her first interaction with the Darkling, and basically the rush that, rushing to the little palace. I liked with the first interaction with the Darkling, you got to see his brutality almost right away because he cut into her in order to discover her power. And you felt Alina's stress and fear and lack of knowledge because she was totally unaware of what was going on. And she herself, who wasn't Grisha before, was terrified of these people who have all these magical powers, and especially being taken by the Darkling, who's the most powerful Grisha. When she was at the little palace and interacting with the other Grisha and actually becoming a Grisha herself and being a part of that community, I loved how she didn't fall for the petty politics or the petty, drama, I guess, between all the Grisha. There's a lot of people trying to suck up to the Darkling, and she didn't fall for that. She didn't bad talk people just because they were from a different class of Grisha. It was definitely like a popularity contest and she didn't fall for it. And even though the Darkling wanted it to elevate her position, she stood her ground and said she didn't want to be the position that the Darkling wanted her to be. She wanted to be part of the class that she falls under. Which one is that? Etherelki. The Etherelki. She wanted the blue Kefta and not the black one. The side characters in this novel were my favorite. Sadly, Alina and Mel. I didn't hate them in this one. They just didn't stand out to me. I preferred the Darkling. The Darkling was my favorite character. I also love Jenya, I think that's her name, and Botkin and Bagra. All those characters, I felt specifically the Darkling and Bagra and Jenya had a lot more personality. They were a lot more interesting to read about. Where Mal and Alina, I felt Alina specifically hardly had any personality. I couldn't tell you anything interesting about her except that she was an orphan and then she was in love with Mal and now she was a Grisha. Like, besides those things, she didn't really have much of a personality, and that always kind of bothered me. And the biggest personality trait that she had was that she blurted things out without meaning to. Like, I felt like she was always blurting things out, and that's not even a personality trait. That was just her blurting things out. So she was definitely bland, and I didn't dislike Mal. Again, he didn't have much personality. The only big personality trait is that he was loyal. And like, that's a good personality trait, but not, I don't know, he just wasn't my favorite. And I loved the Darkling. So the Darkling was my favorite character. I liked how you couldn't quite figure him out. You couldn't figure out if he actually truly liked Alina or if he was just using her. He was always a mystery, and I felt like he was consistent with his mystery from the beginning of the series right till the end. And that was one of the most intriguing things, that you couldn't quite figure him out. Again, with the Darkling, I personally, even though I said it, he's mysterious and I can't quite figure him out, I still feel that way. But at the same time, I think he did actually have romantic feelings for Alina. I think they definitely had a connection because their connection was so strong. But at the same time, if he was truly evil, you got to see one of the first glimpses of that at the end of this novel in the tent scene before they go into the fold. He was pretty brutal with her. Before that scene though, I did enjoy the segment where Alina ran away and with Mel, and they were going after the stag and camping and surviving while hunting the stag. I did enjoy those moments, but yet again, I don't like them together as a couple. They are not my first choice when it comes to the relationships for Alina. Also, one of the things I didn't like about this book is I didn't like how Mel survived at the end of this book. I found that annoying, and yeah. So those are my thoughts for this book, but again, this was my favorite. Second book is Siege and Storm, and I gave this a 4.5 star rating. The reason is I was excited to continue on the story. I liked a lot of things that happened in here. I loved how the Darkling pretty much presented himself right away. You got right into the action. There wasn't a lot of hiding out or anything. And I loved all the segments on the boat. I loved the introduction to Strumbond. You got to have the pirates and everything. I liked how they were now going after the Sea Whip and trying to continue chasing Alina's power, trying to gain her more power. The escape and the revealing of Nikolai was the best. I absolutely loved it. I loved how they had flying ships here. I loved how Nikolai ended up being a prince the whole time. Did not see that coming at all. Nikolai is one of my favorite characters. Again, side characters are my favorite in this series, and I loved everything when they returned back to the little palace. I liked how Alina took her place. I liked how she exhibited her power in order to do so. I like the changes that she was doing at the little palace when it comes to how things were being run. I liked that she was running the show and she was doing it the way that she wanted it to be run. I did not like all the relationship drama between her and Mel. I felt Mel was the most annoying during the series, and I personally wanted Alina with the Darkling, and some people agree, some people disagree. The Darkling is evil, and I'm fully aware of that, and I think he couldn't have a redemption arc. I think it wouldn't have worked because he has done too much evil, not just in the series, but in his lifetime, and you get the impression of that. But what I ultimately wanted was for Alina to become evil. I felt like the author was hinting in that direction when it comes to her connection with the Darkling, how they're able to show up to one another, how when they are connected, their power is stronger, how they can use each other's power, just the whole connectedness, and her being special like the Darkling, her being powerful like the Darkling, how her power is light and how his power is darkness. Just the whole connectedness made me really want them to be together because they were so much alike. And ultimately, in order for that relationship to work, she herself would have had to become evil. And ultimately, that's what I wanted because I think that would have been a more interesting story. Unfortunately, that is not the direction that the story went. It went a totally different direction. Like I said, they had the connectedness. They were able to communicate even though they were not in the same place. She was able to go to him and talk to him, and he was able to go to her and talk to her. And she and the Darkling felt like they were more suited for each other because she was Grisha, and compared to Mal and also Nikolai, they were not similar. Mal was human. He was not a Grisha. He didn't have powers like Alina. Same with Nikolai. Alina was destined to live forever, where the other two were just human. Like, to me, it just made more sense. If she turned evil, it would have worked out fine. Unfortunately, that is not what happened. Unfortunately, the series went in a typical young adult way. So that is my biggest disappointment with the series, that the author decided not to take it a more interesting way. I don't know if that would be considered interesting, but I was upset that it didn't happen that way. I will say, though, the ending for this series, for this book was really good. I liked how at the end, how Lena accepted her power, drew on the connectedness with the Darkling in order to try and kill him, essentially. Obviously, that did not work because we have a third book, but I did really enjoy reading that. Now on to the last book, Rune Rising. I gave this a 4-star rating, and like I said, one of my biggest disappointments in this story is it didn't go the direction that I really wanted to go with Alina becoming evil. Instead, we got the Chosen One story, basically. So here, I liked how it started off in the Whitechapel with the Apparat, how he was basically keeping her captive, and not just her, but also the other people who were working with Alina. And I liked how they broke out of the Whitechapel, the scheme that they thought of in order to do so. I thought that was really good. You definitely felt the creepiness of the Apparat. Him as a character was super creepy and annoying, and you can feel the frustration that Alina had, especially like they were dark in a cave, deep in a cave, and so she couldn't even draw on her powers. So you definitely felt the helplessness there, and I thought that was really well done. I liked their escape. I freaked out when Nikolai came back. Oh my goodness. I just loved his entrance in the beginning of the book. Oh, it was just perfect. I just freaked out. I loved it. I like how Nikolai always has something up his sleeve. Here is a spinning wheel, this new location where he has people working, but he keeps his flying ships there, and it's up in the mountains, far away and safe. So I like how he always has some new trick up his sleeve. I loved Baghra's story, the backstory of herself and the Darkling, and you got to see their origin story. She basically told this big story. I really do enjoy hearing backstories, and I don't mind it being told from the perspective of someone telling a story. I don't mind that format. Some people don't like that, but I personally do, and it was really interesting to finally get the backstory that you've been wanting about the Darkling and herself. So I definitely enjoyed that revelation. The Darkling was brutal, and I think you pretty much had to have him become very brutal when the author decided to take the direction that she did. The fact that it became a Chosen One story, you needed the bad guy to be extremely evil, and you definitely got to see that here. Where in the other books, you're kind of not sure, is he good, is he bad, is he just a morally gray character? Here you definitely got to see himself being the most brutal that he can be. So that was definitely helpful when it came to ending his story. You know, he ended up being the bad guy, and so I was able to accept that. Am I happy about it? Not really, but he definitely did some pretty brutal stuff. He definitely kicked Alina while she was down, and she rose to the occasion that she needed to. But you definitely got to see the Darkling's human side when Bagrat's death happened. You got to see his human side. You saw his human side when during his death. You know, you can sympathize with the Darkling, but he was, by this point, really far gone. No redemption story was possible for this character, I think. I did not like the Mal twist, where he was the last amplifier. I did not like that at all. I did not appreciate it. I just felt the whole search for the Firebird just a waste of time, and I did not appreciate with the final confrontation with the Darkling where Mal had to be sacrificed. Of course I cried, but I did not like it, and if you were going to sacrifice a character, I wish he stayed dead. And so I didn't like he ended up being the sacrifice in order to defeat the Darkling, and I didn't like how he came back to life. If you're gonna make that choice, just kill him off, let that be it. It's easier to say that because I didn't like him, but I just felt like there was some death here, but not nearly as much. I think it would have had more of an impact if Mal actually died, and I didn't like how she lost all her powers at the end of this. I didn't like that direction. Like I said, I wanted her to be evil. I wanted her to be all-powerful. So in order for her to lose all her powers, it just kind of felt like, well, then what was the point of this whole series if she's gonna lose her powers at the end? But at the same time, she didn't want any of this. She wanted to be a normal girl. She wanted a normal life. She wanted to be with the man that she loved. And so in a lot of ways, she got what she actually wanted. So overall, the love interest, like I said, I wanted Alina to be with the Darkling. I thought they worked better as a couple. The ordering, I would pick Alina and the Darkling, then I would pick Alina and then Nikolai, and then finally Alina, then Mal. So I did not get my first choice. But I think when it came to the powers and her being a Grisha, I think it made more sense for her to be with the Darkling. But the fact that she lost all her powers, like, I just felt like that was a convenient way in order for her to be with Mal, which was kind of frustrating, but here we are. Hey everyone, I'm so sorry. I know I'm in a different outfit. This is a totally different day than the last time I filmed. The reason why I am back on a different day is my camera totally ran out of battery and I couldn't continue filming, so I just decided to wrap this video up at a later date. So here I am doing that right now. I'm very sorry. But basically, I just want to go over the final thesis that I believe Leigh Bardugo was trying to have when it came to the Grisha Trilogy. So overall, I think her thesis is summed up in this one line that got repeated throughout the entire series. What is infinite? The universe and the greed of men. Ultimately, I believe Leigh Bardugo was trying to set an example of what could come out of greed. And she uses several of the characters, the outcomes of these characters in the final story, in the final book. I believe she tried to explain this thesis using the characters. Those who had greed usually ended up with a bad outcome, and those who were not pursuing greed ended up basically virtuous in the end of the story. And so the examples I have to defend this argument is the Darkling. He created the fold. Even though he created the fold, it was useless to him. He wasn't able to use the fold to his power. He kept failing at that. He wasn't able to control the Volcra or the monsters in the fold. And so even though he had this power, even though he was craving and greeding after power, even when he used his power, it was useless to him. Again, with the Darkling, his final death, he ended up dying. He wasn't able to fulfill his greed. He wasn't able to obtain more power through Alina. And ultimately he died, and he died an unheroic death. He didn't even die through power. He died by a humbled knife. So I think ultimately the Darkling did not get what he wanted. Even though he greeded after power, he never got to achieve it, and in the end he ended up dying. Alina herself, she ended up greeding after power as well, but it was fruitless in the end. She ended up not having powers after she got the last amplifier. She lost all her powers. So again, she was greedy after power and it was fruitless in the end. And finally, Morozova, the creator of the amplifiers, he was unable to complete the mission alone of creating the amplifiers. He did still have 3 amplifiers. The third one was supposed to be the Phoenix, or the Firebird, whatever, and it ended up being Mal, and that's because he used his power that was for the amplifier to save his daughter. So even though he was greedy to complete the amplifiers, he himself wasn't able to, and because of his greed, since he was pursuing these amplifiers, pursuing his research and creating these amplifiers, he lost his family in the end. So I just thought it was very interesting how Leigh Bardugo continued to recite this in her novels. I kept coming across this one phrase, and I think ultimately this was her ultimate thesis of this trilogy. I think there's some truth to it. I believe it's true. There's no point to greed because in the end we all die. I didn't like it though. I didn't enjoy reading these novels. I don't enjoy that this was the ultimate thesis. I actually wanted people to be bad and they weren't. So ultimately I think she was trying to say that greed gets you absolutely nowhere. It will leave you empty-handed. You will never be satisfied, and so you should pursue humbler things. And I think that's why Alina in the end ended up with Mal. I think she was trying to give an example of what humility looks like. Even though Alina did greed the power, she ultimately wanted Mal. She ultimately didn't want any of this. She wanted just to be a simple girl who got to be with the love of her life, and in the end she did get that. Her love for Mal was simple and humble, and same with Mal. In return, they got what they wanted. Where on the other hand, the Darkling represents total greed, but Mal, I think, represents humility, and humility wins out in the end. Yes, so those were my final thoughts. I don't know if I'm right about that ultimately being her final thoughts, if Leigh Bardugo set out for that, but that's what I gleaned from it. So maybe I'm right, maybe I'm wrong. I still really enjoyed this series. I was disappointed, like I've said throughout the video, that it went in this direction. I wanted Alina to be evil and she didn't end up being evil. I don't know why I wanted that, but I did. I wanted it to be a little bit more interesting, but that's okay. And there's nothing wrong with a story ending on a moral note. I agree with these statements. I believe that greed ultimately is fruitless. So yeah, but those are my final thoughts. I hope this video was interesting. I hope you guys liked it. Please give it a thumbs up if you did. Please subscribe if you have not subscribed yet. And you can follow me on Twitter and Goodreads. The links are down below. And you know what, guys? I'm going to keep reading. Bye.